What's up, X Factor Nation? This is X Factor 27 coming back to you guys again today. Today we got a video about wrestling with Andy. Shout out to him as always. It's moments that hell froze over. So you guys probably already saw the thumbnail for this video and stuff. And the thumbnail is John Cena. We never thought we'd see John Cena turn heel, and pretty much hell froze over when it did, man. So it's still shocking to me. Still not over it. Feel like a bad breakup, like an ex leaving you after y'all been together for a long time. But let's get into this video and see what my boy Andy's talking about. So let's get to it.
It could be something you couldn't have imagined was possible. Yes, there have been occasions in wrestling where hell truly has frozen over. But what are the biggest examples of this? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with the most recent example, John Cena's heel turn.
Yep.
Yes, for years, decades even, fans have been asking for John Cena to turn to the dark side, mostly during the 2000s when his popularity amongst the adult male fan base was at a low point. But throughout all these pleas, Big Match John will always remain steadfast and refused to do so, with the main reason being that there were too many kids out there who saw him as a superhero, and so he didn't want to disappoint them. Sure, there was that time in 2011 where he almost did switch sides in order to have a feud with The Rock, but in the end, such a plan was scrapped and we were left with a situation where it seemed like he was going to remain a babyface for the rest of his career. That was until he didn't, because it was at the Elimination Chamber on March 1st, 2025 that John shocked us all by becoming a villain for the first time since his days as the Doctor of Thugonomics. How did this play out? Well, in the weeks leading up to the show, The Rock had returned to WWE with the intention of claiming Cody Rhodes' soul. But when the American Nightmare ultimately refused this, the Great One was forced to go with what we can only assume was his backup option.
Yeah, so quick insight, guys. I saw this from Wrestling News Coach. Shout out to them. This behind the scenes storyline progression stuff. There were reports saying that The Rock really wanted Cody Rhodes to turn heel and join him instead of John Cena, but Cody Rhodes was like, it would just kill pretty much all the momentum the business has and stuff like that. So pretty much they had to go with Plan B with Andy, just said was John Cena. So either way, it worked out good because one of the main reasons, like Andy said, John Cena didn't turn heel because he felt like it was kids out there that needed him to be that superhero, that role model. They don't need that no more. They got Cody Rhodes. We got Stardust now, just playing, but yeah, that's one of the main reasons. So I feel like that's going to be a very important part of the storyline for real.
Have the man who only moments before became #1 contender to Cody's WWE title turn instead. And that was why at that point Cena did what he said he'd never do by low-blowing the champ and aligning himself with the final boss, fully solidifying his switch to the side of the heels, all while Travis Scott was watching on. Where will things go from here? Well, that remains to be seen. It could be that John beats Cody at WrestleMania and goes on a run as a heel champion, or this could be a short-term thing as WWE wants him to switch back to being a babyface for the rest of his retirement run. We guess we'll just have to wait to see how things play out. And that's not the only shocking moment which has happened in WWE under the Paul Levesque era. No, the same thing would happen at the Survivor Series in 2023 when CM Punk returned to the Fed. Of course, if we're talking about hell freezing over, then we could go back even further with this entry, as it was in 2021 that after 8 years of being MIA from the wrestling world, CM Punk made his return to the ring, though for All Elite Wrestling instead. But when that relationship fell apart in the summer of 2023, the question immediately began being asked, will this be the point that Phil Brooks heads back over to WWE? Sure, it may have seemed unthinkable even a year prior to that, what with all the negative things Punk had said about the company in the years prior. But now that he had the bug for wrestling again and nowhere else to go, it was all of a sudden a possibility for the first time in a long time. And that was a real shocker in itself because so bitter had his original exit from the WWE been, it felt like the earth had well and truly been scorched here. But as they say never. And this was certainly the case here because as the Survivor Series on November 25th of that year was going off the air, Cult of Personality would indeed hit to signal to the Chicago crowd that their boy had done the unthinkable, that he'd returned to WWE. What would happen after that? Well, he would enter into great feuds with the likes of Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre. And at this point it feels...
Yeah, when I heard that music hit, cause that elimination chamber, War Games match was crazy as it was. We had the return of Randy Orton that came back swole as God knows how much. He been in the gym completely eating all his meat and veggies and stuff, looking real built and stuff. But I thought that was gonna be it. But when I heard that static hit and I heard that song and I saw CM Punk, boy, I got up out my seat and I was just acting a pretty fool. I was acting like, because that's one of my childhood favorites for real as well. Like with John Cena, Randy Orton, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H. I grew up with them, and seeing him come back, I never thought I'd see it. I really thought after AEW that was it pretty much. But like they said, hell freeze over. You never say never, man. So yep.
It's like he's aiming to be back in the WWE for the long haul, as his intentions seem to be to one day take over booking of NXT from Shawn Michaels. And that's something no one could have predicted as recently as 2022. But the wrestling world is a strange place indeed, and it's always surprising us with what it will create next. Moments we could never have seen coming in a million years.
Facts.
Hell, not a single one of us could have predicted what would happen years prior to this in 1991, when the two big leagues of that time, WWF and WCW, collided when Ric Flair joined the WWF with the big gold belt still around his waist.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, back then, WCW was the second biggest wrestling company in North America, and while WWF had their own top star in Hulk Hogan, WCW had their own contender for the best wrestler in the world, Ric Flair. And that was why fans spent years fantasizing about what it might be like if the two companies were to work together one day and those two figures were to clash. What no one could have expected, though, was that this would happen in 1991. And under wild circumstances, as it was after having a falling out with WCW booker Jim Herd that Flair would leave the company and instead sign on the dotted line with Vince McMahon. But that still doesn't explain how he had the big gold belt with him when he did show up in WWF. How could that be possible? It would be like if Jon Moxley returned to WWE today with the AEW title over his shoulder. Well, the reason it happened was because back then, when someone won the world title, they had to pay a bond so that they wouldn't refuse to do business after the fact and not drop it when asked. And when Jim Herd told Slick Rick he wasn't going to give him his bond back, the champ assumed the belt was his property. So, since it was his property then, he was free to take it anywhere he wanted, including the WWF.
Oh, wow.
And that was how we got Bobby Heenan arriving on WWF television with the WCW title late that year in anticipation of the Real World's champion showing up. Obviously then, this would lead to the big showdown between Flair and Hogan, title for title, as we found out who the best was, right? Well, unfortunately no. This match never happened on WWF television at the time, but that doesn't take away from the fact it truly felt like a hell freezing over moment when the Nature Boy first showed up on their TV with the belt in tow, telling everyone that this was the real gold to have and that the WWF's top prize was merely secondary by comparison. Really, in some ways, you could call this a precursor for what was to come a few years later with the Monday Night Wars, an early shot across the bow, if you will, from one promotion to the next. But as we all know now, those wars would come to an end in 2001, as that...
Yeah, I didn't know that about Ric Flair with the big gold belt for Ric Flair. I know he left WCW and he had contract disagreements with Homie they were just talking about. But I didn't know Homie didn't want to pay Ric Flair his bun. And Ric Flair, being the nature boy and gangster that he is, took the belt with him, man. So that's the most Ric Flair thing you can do, man. I respect it though. Gotta respect game for real.
was when something we never thought we'd see happened. WWF bought WCW.
Yeah.
Take your minds back to the turn of the millennium, if you will. Both WWF and WCW are deeply locked in competition with each other, with each side vying for supremacy. Needless to say then, usually on Monday nights when both promotions were airing their flagship shows, Raw and Nitro, head-to-head. At times, this led to WCW getting the edge in viewership, as was the case in 1996 and 1997, and at times it led to WWF taking the lead instead, as was the case in 1998 and 1999.
Facts.
Come 2000, though, it was clear World Championship Wrestling was in the midst of a death spiral they had no way of escape.
I blame Vince Russo and his booking. That's one of the main reasons WCW failed. I don't care what nobody say. Vince Russo is known for his bad booking, and that was one of the major reasons WCW failed, in my honest opinion. So
Aping, and this meant it didn't come as a huge surprise when, in early 2001, they went out of business. What did come as a surprise, however, was who would buy WCW after they went bankrupt. And that was because, while the talk at the time had been that Eric Bischoff was trying to purchase it so he could try to build it back up from the ground level again, it wouldn't be him who made the deal for ownership. No, instead that deal would be made by Vince McMahon. Yes, it was on the March 26th episode of both Raw and Nitro that many fans learned for the first time that Vince had indeed purchased his competition, and this meant he now pretty much held a monopoly over North American wrestling. But that wasn't the end of the shocker. No, things would go even further than this because later that night the boss planned to hold a simulcast segment where he would speak to the audiences of both shows and tell them about his plans for the future of WCW. Plans which no doubt involved him crushing them with his boot once and for all. In a sight no one could have seen coming, however, these plans would be foiled when, during that segment, Shane McMahon appeared in the ring on Nitro to announce that, in kayfabe at least, he was the one who had bought WCW, and he was now going to be running it in direct competition to his father going forward.
Love it.
And so like that, the war was back on, or at least we thought it was. In truth, however, all this led to was the invasion angle. One of the biggest letdowns in wrestling as the super showdown between both sides, which fans had been waiting for years to see, turned into WWF main eventers versus the Crew of Thunder for the most part. But even if this was the case, that initial segment was still shocking enough that it almost certainly broke a few brains. After all, who could have ever imagined the war would end with one side owning the other outright? Maybe if someone like the NWO had been strong for longer, things might have been different. And if that had happened, the invasion might not have been necessary. But it did happen, and a few months after it did, the NWO ended up in WWE too.
Yep. I was just about to say that because I knew the NWO ended up in WWE, and that's when Hulk Hogan was a heel. So, man, yeah. But that's very interesting. Like Vince brought them. I think Vince saw opportunity. That's the main thing about Vince McMahon. He was a great businessman. I can't lie about that. All the other things out the book, the man was a great businessman and revolutionary in wrestling. And he saw opportunity like, hey, I get rid of WCW, I buy them, bam, I'm good. I ain't got to worry about nothing for real until, like TNA. But TNA really was never really a competition to WWE for real. So, yeah.
Yet another moment none of us ever saw coming. That's right, when the NWO decided not to be a part of the invasion, presumably because they had big money Time Warner contracts they could sit at home and live off of for a while without even needing to set foot inside of a WWF ring, many assumed we were never going to see the original trio made up of Hollywood Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash back in the Fed, or at least not for a long time. But as it happened, it would be in February of 2002, only 3 months after the invasion ended, that they'd choose to make the jump. What was the angle that brought them in here? Well, after Ric Flair had become kayfabe part owner of WWF, Vince McMahon realized he needed to do the unthinkable. He needed to end his own creation. After all, if he couldn't be in full control of it, then no one could have it at all. So this was why, in the lead up to No Way Out 2002, he'd cut a series of promos backstage from his office where he'd talk about injecting WWF with a lethal dose of poison. What would this poison be? Well, it would be Hogan, Hall, and Nash. And this was a statement made in both kayfabe and reality, because in truth, there were many backstage who didn't want the NWO to be brought on board. So controversial of a decision would this be, in fact, there would even allegedly be a backstage poll taken to see if people wanted the New World Order in the company. But when the majority agreed to bring them in, the decision was made. And so it was that at No Way Out, for the first time in almost a decade, the three guys who had almost killed the company returned to WWE as a dominating heel force once more. Or at least they would be this on night one. Pretty quickly, though, they'd turn into little more than cannon fodder for the likes of Steve Austin. And at that point then, the idea of the NWO being treated like a serious threat under Vince McMahon's watch was dead as quickly as it got started. Yes, before the spring was over, Hogan would have turned babyface and the New World Order would be on life support. Again though, none of this can take away from how shocking that original moment of them showing up on WWE TV was, this time.
Yeah, when I was still too young during this time, guys, so I went back and watched this whole thing, and Usually, when I saw the NWO come back, Vince doesn't want nobody else's ideas from another company, so he would scrap it and pretty much be like, "This is my own creation." So he made the NWO look like Cannonball to Stone Cold and stuff. You guys saw it, and you know what he did? He turned Hogan back babyface, and and Scott Hall and them were just pretty much in dead in the water pretty much with the NWO because this McMahon didn't make it up. It was a WCW thing. So yeah, that's what I feel about Vince. I don't know if everybody agree with that opinion or not, but yeah.
And their WCW guises. But that's not the only shocking moment which involved the NWO. No, their very creation itself was a moment none of us ever saw coming. So let's look at that next. The night they first formed in July of 1996. Yes, it's one of the most game-changing moments in wrestling history, and not just because it saw the formation of a new powerhouse stable, but also because it saw the most successful and shocking heel turn of all time take place. You see, even if the bloom had long since come off the rose for Hulk Hogan by the time the mid-90s came around, he was still very much someone fans saw as being an eternal babyface because ever since first rising to prominence in WWF during the early 80s, he'd been the eternal hero, the paragon of all that was good and true, and the man who kids everywhere could depend on. So when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash jumped ship from WWF in the summer of 1996 then, and began teasing a third man who was going to join their group of outsiders, no one expected it would be Terry Bollea who would fill this role. No, even Sting felt like a more logical choice. But when the main event of Bash at the Beach that year hit the ring and the Hulkster came down to apparently save the day, only to then drop the big leg on Randy Savage, everyone watching realized they'd just seen hell freeze over. Here was the biggest babyface in wrestling history, the poster boy for the entire industry, going to the dark side, and in the process creating a new stable known as the New World Order, one that was intent on taking over WCW going forward. As you would expect then, such a move led to a massive upswing for World Championship Wrestling business. Hell, this was the real start of the 90s wrestling boom period, as it would cause WCW to go on an 83-week win streak over WWF in the ratings, something which very nearly led to Vince McMahon's promotion going bust. But let's move away from WCW for a moment and back over to modern-day WWE.
Yeah, NWO, Hogan turning heel, one of the biggest heel turns in wrestling history. Top 5 in my honest opinion, because it's history. Like Andy said, he was the poster boy of wrestling. And we really just pretty much got the same thing in the modern version with John Cena just 2 weeks ago. So, man, I tell you, hell has froze over so much with Hogan and now John Cena. It may take a minute for it to freeze again, but when it freezes, it's freezing, man, I tell you.
As it's there, we find our next entry, the partial dissolution of a team we hoped would never come, when in late 2024, Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods of the New Day turned on Big E. That's right, this one was particularly painful to watch, as for a full decade prior to their breakup, the New Day had been one of the few constants left in WWE. Seriously, in a world where people come and go, and where tag teams and stables never last for the long term, this trio always managed to remain together no matter what. Why was this? Well, because they were such great friends behind the scenes, and so always pushed to keep their union on screen together. Sadly though, in early 2022, Big E would suffer an injury in a match that damaged his neck so badly, to date, he's never been able to return to the ring. And because of this, Kingston and Woods would carry on as a tag team. But at least they were able to keep their fallen partner there in spirit, right? Well, that was true up until the point they started going on a losing streak in 2024. A losing streak so bad it would cause them to begin thinking about going their separate ways once and for all. Obviously then, seeing this play out on his TV screen, Big E realized that he needed to make his return at that point in order to make sure his partners kept the New Day alive, with him doing so on the 10th anniversary celebration of their formation later that year. But while he would be successful in keeping Kofi and Xavier together here, it would come at a cost, because now, believing that the former WWE champion had abandoned them in their hour of need, Big E's friends took to blaming him and pretty much exiling him from the group. Yes, it was a moment everyone hoped they would never see, as it meant the end of one of the longest running and most beloved stables in WWE history. or at least meant the end of them as a babyface act, because now a heel duo, Kingston and Woods, have continued to work together on Raw in recent months, making life a living hell for whoever they're against at that given moment. Will we ever see them go babyface again as the full New Day
Yeah, I really felt like, to be honest with you guys, I really felt like Xavier was gonna turn on Kofi, and that was gonna set up a feud. Xavier finally gets the push he gets or whatever, but them turning on E, that shocked me too. That's another reason Hell keeps freezing over. Every time Hell gets unfrozen, he freezes back over, which I'm cool with that or whatever. But anyway, that didn't make no sense. And these two are delusional. And when I saw Kofi with that Majin symbol, you guys don't know that from Dragon Ball Z, and now Xavier got it tatted on him as well. They some delusional people, man. And Kofi was one of my favorite. I mean, when he had that fake Jamaican accent, man, and all that stuff like that. But I don't respect them no more. I still watch Up, Up, Down, Down. But Xavier, we ever meet, man, me and you gonna have to have a talk about why you do my boy E like that. You too, Kofi. I ain't gonna fight y'all. I can see y'all don't want these hands, but we need to have a talk if we ever meet.
Unite? We suppose that depends on whether or not Big E can ever get cleared. But what about another huge shocker, a truly wild moment from back in 2014 when Sting went to WWE? Now, this one truly was a hell-freezing over moment if there ever was one, because for years, Steve Borden had been the lone holdout of WCW stars who went over to WWE once the former company went out of business in 2001. That's right, while people like Booker T, Goldberg, Scott Steiner, Ric Flair, and the NWO all made their way to WWE eventually, Sting never did. Where did he go instead then? He'd hitch his wagon to the then upstart promotion TNA as he helped to give them something of a boost during their early days. And that ended up being the best move he could have made, as it gave him a whole second run where he got to work with all new talent like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, and even Kurt Angle, just to name a few. Alas though, come the mid-2010s, TNA had fallen, and this meant keeping a hold of people at the level of Sting was growing increasingly difficult. Really, if there was ever a moment where the Californian was going to jump ship, then this was it. And it appears he knew this, because feeling like now was the time, it would be in November of 2014 at the Survivor Series that the legend shocked the world when he appeared to help Dolph Ziggler win the 5-on-5 elimination bout at the end of the show. Well, we say shock. In truth, though, there were some hints that this was coming, hints such as Sting's appearance in that year's WWE 2K game. But even then, it was still a hell of a moment to see him finally show up in a WWE ring after all those years, as he was the one white whale fans had by that point accepted they were never going to see jump ship. How would his run go from there? Well, sadly it would end in injury, as after losing to Triple H at WrestleMania 31...
Yeah, I'm gonna pause it right there. Sting should have not lost. Sting should have beat Triple H. How you let Sting come from never coming to WWE, building him up as much as he did? He got injured after this match, sadly. And you not have him win. Triple H could have took the loss, because that was the feud that was building up the feud. Triple H versus Sting. Sting was the person that caused the Authority to be out of power. And first of all, second of all, shout out to my boy Dolph Ziggler. That 5-on-5 match where Sting made his debut, Dolph Ziggler carried that match. Him eliminating all them people, and then him coming down between him and Seth Rollins, and then Sting came out. That gave me goosebumps. That was chills, and that was absolute cinema and stuff like that, for real. But let's be honest, Triple H could have took that loss, but that was just Vince not trying to get any WCW guys a win. And I just honestly feel like he's just petty for that. Sting should have won that match. I don't care what nobody say.
Sting wrestled Seth Rollins before suffering a neck injury, which almost ended his career entirely. And he's not the only one who had a bad initial run in WWE, as the same would happen with Goldberg in 2003, which was what made it all the more shocking when he returned there again for a second time in 2016. Yes, after the debacle that was Bill Goldberg's first run in WWE, the one which saw him lose out to Triple H multiple times, get a wig put on him by Goldust in a backstage segment, and then having his infamous bout with Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20, few, if any, expected he'd ever return there again. And this was only compounded by the fact that in the years which followed, the Tulsa native would have few positive things to say about his time working under Vince McMahon. But you can never say never in wrestling. No, things can always change, especially if the money is right. And as we all know, time can do a lot to heal old wounds, which is exactly what they appeared to do for Goldberg's wounds, as come the mid-2010s, he was back in talks with the Fed again. Sure, it didn't start off with discussions about an in-ring return. No, like with Sting, it started off with talks of appearing in a WWE 2K video game. But once this deal was made and the door was opened, things were able to progress further, and so it was that in the lead up to Survivor Series 2016, Bill would indeed appear in a WWE ring again. Why had he come back here? Well, to right a wrong by redoing that bout he'd had against Brock Lesnar all those years ago. And right that wrong he would, because the former WCW World Champion would go on to stun the world when he absolutely squashed the Beast in just 86 seconds. As to what he'd do after that, well, he'd have another great match against Brock at WrestleMania 33 a few months later, and from there, he'd continue to periodically reappear on WWE TV, now as a full-blown elder statesman. Still though, there was another return to WWE years after the person in question first left, which is arguably even more surprising than this. Who are we talking about this time?
It's a great stop to talk for a minute. I'm gonna leave you there. But I have mixed feelings about Goldberg. He's a great athlete and all that stuff. What he did to Brock, the first match was great, because you didn't get to see that often. He should not beat the Fiend. Rest in peace, my boy Bray Wyatt. He should have not squashed the Fiend the way he did, because the Fiend was unbeatable. He was a force of nature, an anomaly. And Goldberg just come and just squashes him. That booking decision still didn't make no sense to me at all, but I tell you, man, Goldberg's all right with me, but I did not like that at all. So I kind of got a little bit of lost respect for Goldberg for that. And it didn't have nothing to do with him. It was probably just the booking, but I just didn't like seeing that play out with my boy Bray, man. I really did.
Who else but Sable?
Hey.
Yes, back during the Attitude Era, the biggest women's star WWF had on the roster was Sable. And this led to her feeling like she deserved to be earning a lot more money than she was, and so it wasn't long before she began asking for a pay raise. Of course, Vince McMahon didn't want to give her this, though. No, he'd rather not have her at all if that were the case.
Yep.
And that was where things broke down between the two sides, as Sable left WWF in 1999 and would also go on to file a lawsuit against the company soon after this. That's right, things were getting really bitter now, and so it seemed clear that any hopes of reconciliation were going to be off the table for a long, long time. Or at least it seemed like they were, because in a move that shocked many, it would be in 2003 that Sable would return to WWE, this time to act as a new on-screen love interest to Vince McMahon. As you can probably guess though, this renewed relationship was not one designed to last for long. No, with the same tension still existing there between the two parties, Sable would be gone from WWE all over again by 2004, with her this time being gone for good, as to date, she's yet to make another return. But who knows? If the circumstances are right, then anything can happen in wrestling.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay. That was the end of the video. Shout out to Wrestle with Andy as always, man. Great content creator, man. He put some banger videos together with so much knowledge and everything. So you guys, please go subscribe to him and tell him X Factor 27 sent you. Like I said, I'm a small YouTuber. He may not know who I am, but he deserves the recognition that he gets, for real, for real. But yeah, all these moments were crazy, man. Top 3 for me. Number 1, my childhood hero. I feel like outside of my mother, my grandma, and my auntie, John Cena was one of the ones that, when I was growing up, that made me feel like I can do anything. And now he sold his soul to the devil, The Rock, for reasons I still don't know. I can't wait to Friday to find that out. But yeah, New Day turned on them, and then Hulk Hogan, man, and stuff like that. So turning to the dark side as well. But yeah, all these moments are crazy, and considering what we got going on in WWE right now, it's just gonna continue to grow, man. But other than that, shout out and thank you to Wrestle with Andy, and y'all have a good day. X Factor out.